building all over the place, hopefully. Well, if we're on the case, it will be. Okay, as billed, this is a sort of combination of two talks, workshops I did at the EAUC conference in New York in March. I can't believe it was that long ago. And it seemed to go down really well, and a lot of people said they would like to see it, hear it, participate in it again, and so we got the notes, and here you are. So that's brilliant. It's really nice to see you all. We've got, what, about 2 hours-ish?
Yeah.
We finished at 12, don't we? So it's a good, decent time. It's a lot longer than I had in New York, which is good news. What I think I'd like to do is just take you through some ideas by way of really a sampler of some of the work that I've been doing, some of the work that other people have been doing, treated as an interactive session. So I'd love to hear from some of you about some of your thoughts or other things that you've been doing. I don't know much about you as a group. I haven't seen your background, so we'll treat it as a conversation. And then, because it's a good 2 hours, you don't want to be listening to me for all that time, I can assure you. So we will do a little workshop, and we'll try to put together what we've been discussing in the first half, and come up with a strategy based on some of the ideas. So, some of you might have done some homework on me, some of you might not. Very briefly, I am a professor in this university, Professor of Regeneration and Sustainable Development at the School of the Built Environment. But I have not been an academic all my life, far from it, only 5 years. In the past, I've headed up the National Centre for Business and Sustainability, which was originally a cooperative bank idea in association with the University of Greater Manchester, and was for a time Chief Executive of Sustainability Northwest. And before that, I was a consultant for various outfits. And if you summed up my career, or if you try to get me to sum up my career, before a few years ago, I would have said, oh yeah, I'm just a jobbing sustainability guy, and I might talk about sustainable change and that sort of thing. But what I came to realize was it wasn't just sustainable change I was interested in. I've done things like environmental impact assessment coordination with major companies, environmental management systems. I've done social accounting, boardroom visioning using the natural step, which you'll see a bit of in my presentation. And I sort of compartmentalized all of those things and then sort of thought them as separate elements of my career, which all had to do with sustainability and organizational change in the environment. But actually, it dawned on me and coincided with a bit of a, I guess, a career crisis, you'd call it, about seven years ago, where I was thinking, look, you know, we are trying to put all of this evidence-based information in front of people, decision makers. They might be public sector or elected officials or private sector business people, but they are not making the sustainable decisions that we would like them to make. Why is that? So the first thing you do is you think, it's my fault. I must be rubbish at what I'm doing. So I'm just going to concentrate on my music career and just forget all about it. It was a good go, but it wasn't working out. But fortunately, a friend of mine who is also on the board of the NCBS, who's a professor up at Lancaster, Professor Carrie Cooper, who's an organizational psychologist, said to me, look, you know, you should really investigate the human side of this. What is it about the human condition? What are psychologists, psychiatrists, behavioral scientists saying about how people make decisions? And I think you might get closer to what's going on. So I'd never really thought about that much. So I looked into it, got quite excited about it, and we eventually wrote a book together called Positively Responsible, which was half based on research about how behavior works and half on some of my exploits, some of which I will talk about in my in the slides about how you can use things like theatre and nature and all sorts of things to get people more interested in the message, and it's about context rather than changing people's minds. Just something I've come to understand is vital. If you get any of this, or if you take nothing else away, it's a firm belief of many psychologists, and I think this is right, that it's very difficult to change people's minds. Very difficult. There's so many barriers, we'll talk about that in a minute, to changing people's minds, going toe-to-toe and arguing it out with people who are entrenched in various ways to hold on to a belief. But it's much easier to change the context in which people make decisions. So if you make it easier for them to shift without challenging their inner belief, that tends to make much more of a difference. And so I took the book and the understanding from that book into my academic career. And since then, I've been working with the Environment Agency and local authorities to try to understand how you can use motivational and different incentivization ideas to shift people away from a resistance to action. That's effectively what I've come to realize I'm doing. Motivation, incentivization. So, what I think I'll do, if that's okay with you, is we'll just start to explore some of the ideas that led to some of these pronouncements. And as I say, the best thing to do would be to talk to you about what I've discovered, found out, but to hear from you as well. So if you're not understanding, want to interject, ask a question, or just share a story that's in that vein, that would be terrific. Okay so far? Okay, so on with the show. I particularly focused on values, and you'll see why. I'm very interested in values, but it sort of broadly encapsulates the behaviour change side of things. But a few definitions and a few understandings about values, because the workshop will do is quite important that you at least accept or understand what I'm saying under this. So it is confusing. Because there's so many different things that influence the way people make decisions and take action. What's valuable and important might seem a truism, but how do you know? How do you know that? That's a key thing. And some of what I'm going to say could be quite daunting, in that you'll ask yourself, well, I'd be fantastic at doing this if I understood every single individual who I encountered, either on their own or as a group, but how is that possible? And the answer is, it's not. And so a lot of the strategies we're going to talk about and develop together today have more to do with understanding the variety and range of possible reactions to your message, and trying to make sure that you catch as many different ways of motivating people, either in the same delivery or through a campaign or strategy of multiple messages. So these internal factors that influence behavior, motivation, knowledge, awareness, attitude, emotion, the locus of control, what can I do about it, responsibilities and priorities, all influence the way we think. That's not a helpful slide, really, for those of you who are thinking, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Well, that's not the way it's going to work. And in fact, the work that led to this slide, the paper concluded that there is no earthly way that you can encapsulate the way people think to move them to pro-environmental action in one single diagram. Maybe you could try it, but it would expand to the size of the universe, almost. So that's not helpful. What is helpful is to understand that there is a multitude of things that influence behavior. So what are we talking about here? And I can assure you we'll move off to professorial delivery very soon, but it is important just to sort of get some of these words nailed down. So an attitude is in effect a regularity of feeling, thought, disposition. If you have an attitude, it drives the way that you think about things, so that if we know what your attitude towards X is, we can pretty much guess through a range of different stimuli that you're going to receive how you're going to deal with those things. That's broadly how it works, but it's not really fixed either. People can be seriously affected by, particularly in emotional delivery. That's why things like Inconvenient Truth or Gasland, the anti-fracking movie, if you haven't seen that, that's really good. That's why it's full of facts, but when you see a guy bending over, putting a lighter to his water tap and it exploding into flames. Has anybody seen this? Oh, you've got to see it, it's amazing. You know, you can't help being completely overtaken by emotion of it, the outrage, the injustice of a man minding his own business, having people drilling for shale gas and doing that to his house. So it is quite important that emotion figures quite strongly. So that's why in the second bullet we break down attitudes into emotions, what is coming in to you, in effect, thought process, the cognitive element, and the willingness to act. All of those build into your attitude. That's three totally separate things pushing on your attitude. And even if you have an attitude, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do anything about it. You're not going to necessarily act on it, because that willingness to act is tempered by two more things: if it's going to be effective and how it's going to be received by others. Now, a lot of people watch this and listen to it. It's certainly not my work. This goes back many decades of social psychologists doing this. Some of it's counterintuitive, and that's sort of the problem. You know, people don't want to believe or don't want to understand how they think. If you approach a bunch of business people and say, I hate to tell you this, but you might think you pride yourself on making rational, sound decisions based on facts, but actually about 80% of the decisions you make are based on raw emotion. And they're outraged, they actually get angry with you. That's how dare you. I haven't reached where I am today going on silly little emotions. It's all about fact. So even if you can put this information in front of people, it doesn't necessarily help. But as campaigners and strategists, it should. So we can summarize that, or I have anyway, because I like things simple, even if some psychologists don't, into 5 main questions that I always ask before I do an experiment in the field. And they are: do people understand that there's a problem at all? Climate change. It's a problem, isn't it? Is it? Right, that's not a good start. People have got to at least appreciate that it's a problem. Second is, do I know what to do about it? And you'd think, well, of course, yes, just use less energy and that's fine. To a certain extent, people might get that, but what kind of energy? Where does energy come from? If I use less or more, or if does it have anything to do with price? Then all of a sudden, this whole understanding about what do I do gets diluted. Some of you might have been dealing with aspects of the government's latest energy conservation efforts, Green Deal and others. That's some of the work that I've been doing, is asking people, what should you do? And they can rattle off, you know, loft insulation and draft exclusion and maybe get a better boiler. What do you do first? Which one do you choose first? No idea. Okay, and as soon as there's a question about, do I know what to do, I know the range of things to do, but I don't know exactly what to do, then that whole element starts to fall away. And a worry about the future, about making the right decision, always leads to inaction. We could prove that very easily by when in times of economic uncertainty, like we're in now, savings accounts always go up. Why is that? Because people don't know what's going to happen in the future, they feel insecure, so they hold on to the money. Just exactly what we're talking about here. So if you're not sure what to do, you could be the most committed people in the world, you can really care, which is the third box up there, but if you're unsure what to do, you're still not doing it. That's why you get all of these confused polls coming out, and I've done them myself. I get 75 to 80% agree or strongly agree that climate change is here, that it is serious, that it is our fault, and that individuals have a responsibility to do something about it. 75 to 80% consistent. And you look at that across America and all of Europe, you always get that. But we are still increasing greenhouse gas emissions, and the rate of retrofit on housing is not increasing significantly. Okay, so how is that possible? What's going on there? Well, we carry on with our boxes here. If you do know what will work best first, you also worry about whether it will work at all. And that's not just whether the technology or the measure will work, but also this speaks to the idea of what difference can I make? You know? And you get all of these things, not only as the individual, what difference can I make, but the UK is only responsible for 2% of greenhouse gas emissions, and it's going down all the time, and China builds a power station every day, and you know, there's all of that going on in people's heads. And so what's the point? Is all of this effort, time and money really going to make a difference? If there's any doubts there, that leads to inaction. And then finally, the frivolous one, the silly one, the one we just chuck in there, the one. This can't be serious, can it? What will my peers think of my behaviour? What will people think if I do it? It's probably the most important one. Always crack the gag, and I'm going to do it again, because it's broadly true that anywhere you go in the world, there is a concern about doing the wrong thing. But in Britain, you really can die of embarrassment. You really can. People drop dead all the time. At least that's what they think in their minds will happen if they do something that people will turn around and laugh and ridicule them about. And just the concern, the worry, the thought that that might happen is enough to put people off completely. And unfortunately, we see all the time that there are worries about doing the wrong thing. In energy and energy conservation, the urban wind turbine is a good example. People invested in them, proudly put them on their houses. Then everybody said, oh, it's ridiculous, they don't work. Wide-scale embarrassment, any kind of innovative, renewable energy thing that came on the market after that, people were very skeptical about. They think, oh, well, that same thing's going to happen to me. I'm not going to fall into that trap. I'm just going to continue the way we're So does that help? Does that make a bit of sense? And all of that is Adrian Fishbein's theory of reasoned action, and there's just loads, acres of that, and lots of variations on it, and you can while away many hours looking at that stuff, if that interests you. But I found it useful, not necessarily because this is it, because there are many other theories. I don't know if there's any psychologists in the room. Nobody's intervened yet, so I might be safe. But I like it because politicians and strategists get it. There are other theories which are a little bit more difficult to get your head around. And I even work with psychoanalysts. In fact, there's a book out just a couple of weeks ago called Engaging with Climate Change, which broadly is populated by psychoanalysts looking at how people react to climate change from a psychoanalytic perspective. So I responded, I've got a chapter in there responding to a woman who wrote a chapter on the myth of apathy, which is absolutely fascinating. And it goes right into Freudian and Jungian theory about how we don't act in the threat of an undermining or a damage to nature. And this is often interpreted as people don't care, they're just not bothered. But this paper argues, and read it for yourself and see what you think, that actually it's at the total reverse. That the idea that the carrying capacity of the Earth is going to be so damaged by what we're doing, and the pollution that we're kicking out, and the mining and the man-made compounds are so damaging that we just haven't got very long left on this Earth, is such a threat to who we are and our security that we totally compartmentalize it. We break it off, it's called splitting, and we park it in a part of our subconscious, and that allows us to carry on with life. And you think, well, that doesn't sound very responsible. But if you think about it, there's an easier way to understand how this is working, because we see terrible stories in the news all the time, and occasionally we witness terrible things. Stuff happens in life. You know, human beings are killed all the time. And if we absorb the enormity of the implications of every single human life or loss of nature, and dwelled on it for any length of time, you'd never get out of bed. So in a way, it's a sort of defense mechanism, very clever, that you try to learn the lessons of what happened in the demise of others, but your brain doesn't allow you to dwell on that to such an extent that you can't function. And it's a sort of similar argument that this paper's arguing. So instead of arguing that apathy is that people don't care, she argues, the woman who's writing it, is that we care too much. Fascinating. I just find it endlessly interesting. And it's a bit of an aside, because this is an area which is enormously challenged. I'm not even putting that in there in this discussion as something for you to seriously think about. It's very problematic for policymakers and decision makers, because in order to overcome that sort of thing, you would have to psychoanalyze and get to grips with the innate fears and the subconscious thoughts of every individual, and that just, that's a million miles away from what any politician thinks or wants to go. So it's a non-starter in policy terms. This stuff, though, that's much more accessible.
Who's that paper by?
Her name is Lertzman. Lertzman. Yeah, Renee, I think. Renee Lertzman. She's American. Yeah, and the book is Engaging with Climate Change. It's published by Routledge.
That links more to eco-psychology, what you just...
Yeah, there's huge overlaps into eco-ecology and some deep green thinking, and it's all, nothing stands on its own in this area. That you will find overlaps into other disciplines, which is, I love that. I think we need more of that. There's far too much silo thinking. The engineers and the ecologists and the psychologists, and they're all doing their own thing, whereas actually they should all be working together. It's very difficult, they all speak different languages, but anyway, we need to go there. All right, so moving on. And as this presentation sort of lurches around a bit, but as I say, it's more of a sampler than some sort of even presentation. So just to recap before we get on to segmentation, at least we've understood a little bit about values, a little bit about what attitudes and behaviour are and why people act the way they do, and some of the barriers in the way to action, whether it's pro-environmental action or any other action for that matter. There are different lobes and different areas, including the psychoanalytic side, where, you know, there are many other schools of thought to add to the theory of reasoned action. But I like it, and I like to present it because it's simple, it's clean, people get it, we can move on. At least the message here is there are a number of things that influence the way people think and how they are likely to act. And I guess what I should have said before I moved off that slide is you don't have to have every single one of those in place before people will act. You can get away, we'll come back to this, with some pieces missing. All right? So, for example, if people don't know that there's a problem and they really couldn't care less, but they do know what to do about it, they do understand that it would work if they could be bothered to do it, and they really couldn't care what people thought of them, you've got a working relationship with them, provided you can incentivize them, because they really couldn't care, they're not bothered, they really don't want to talk to you. Why would they? It's not a thing, okay? But at least they get it. And so if you can offer them something, I mean, I'm building a picture of a really cynical git here, and they don't exist really. But I'm just, for example, you can get away with it. But there are elements of this where you really have to have it in place, otherwise it's not going to happen. Do I know what to do? Is vital. You know, people have to know, and pretty much they have to believe it's going to work. So there are some constants that you really have to nail down, but you don't have to have all of them in place.
But wouldn't that mean, though, like if you're incentivising someone, they might do one particular action, but they wouldn't be consistent across their whole life in all of the decisions that they make?
Very well observed. And so, as we'll talk about incentivisation a little later, we'll come on to that. But now that you've raised it, absolutely right. So if people are not getting it at all, if they're not emotionally engaged at any point, and you incentivise them, you can get them to change, but it's very transient. It's like a one-off transaction. And as we'll discuss later on, sometimes that's okay. So how many times do you buy a boiler? How many times do you put insulation in the roof? Actually, I don't care if it's a one-off transaction, because you're not going to do it again. And even that small action, without getting any of the rest of it or having lifestyle changes, will make a difference to climate change. But ideally, you want to get all of those in place, and so that's the difference between transactional behaviour, one-off, and habitual behaviour, which is lifestyle change. Okay? But well spotted, that's absolutely right. Okay, so a little bit about segmentation. I throw this in really because some people are familiar with, or worse, wedded to the way that DAC and DEFRA and the Energy Saving Trust segment population. And these are all, you know, generally segmented against age and income. Broadly, a lot of it's about that. So, you know, you elderly, up for it, and the poor, not bothered, and the middle classes, and all that sort of stuff. You've seen all of this, haven't you? Different segmentations. It's okay, and as far as it goes, it's entirely derived from marketing, and that isn't helpful. In a way, you think, well, why isn't it helpful? Because a lot of this stuff came and was financed by the marketing people in the 50s and 60s, who wanted to know how many people made decisions so they could sell more stuff to them. But as I'll show you, it really doesn't fit with the values-based ideas that are coming through now. because different people from different income groups and different ages have different values. And it all gets a bit messy and wrong if you overlay one onto the other, which I've done. And so I'm arguing, and this is not my original idea, there's a company called Cultural Dynamics and a guy called Chris Rose, who some of you will know, some of you won't know, but if you think back to Greenpeace, one of Greenpeace's most famous moments, when the Shell service platform was going to be sunk into the North Sea, and Greenpeace occupied the platform. Anybody remember that or read the story? Chris was the one who devised the strategy and directed the operations. So he now runs his own outfit, campaignstrategy.org, which I would very heavily recommend to you. And he's very interested and well into this Maslow's hierarchy-based idea. Everybody know about Maslow's hierarchy of human needs? Most people. Anybody not? Maybe a quick recap. So Maslow was working many decades ago, and he devised this idea that people have a hierarchy of needs. The lowest echelons are basic needs: food, shelter, warmth, and clothing, that sort of thing. Then you've got the middle echelons, which have to do with human needs, love, sustenance of the soul, if you like, reaction to their efforts, if you like, reinforcement. And then at the very pinnacle, he's got this weird word called self-actualization, which basically means that you're confident in where you are, who you are in the world, and that you are fully functioning, fully engaged, without any hindrance or encumbrance. You're the full human being, which none of us ever reach. So that's sad, isn't it? He believed that following that hierarchy was vital for both investment and for reasons of understanding how human beings work is quite important. And so when Cultural Dynamics and Chris got hold of this idea, they turned that round into segmenting the population into 3 different kinds of people, which seems extraordinary. But there you go. And these are what they call the inner-directed people, who are all about ethics and truth. They look forward to the future. They are the initiators, the first developers, the first acquirers. They don't really care what other people think. Okay. The second bunch are outer-directive. For them, esteem and how people think of them is probably the preeminent feeling. They live in the now. They're gregarious. They are very keen to know that what they have and what they believe and what they do is well received by others. And then the third group are the security people. They are the ones who look backwards. They hark on to an age when things were more stable and more even. They're the kinds of people who say something must be done. Why aren't the authorities doing something? Okay, and they're not necessarily the type of people who you'd think, the sort of older conservative types. Many of us have an element of security stitched into us, depending on who we are and what's happened in our lives. So as a summary of that, they've given little nicknames to these people: the outward-looking people, the pioneers; the esteemed people, the prospectors; and the security people, the settlers. And interestingly, it seems like the settlers are becoming fewer and there's more prospectors around. They're by far the most interesting bunch to me. Because pioneers are always the people that you talk to when you get around a table and start wanting to gather people around to talk about climate change. Generally, people who are interested in renewable energy, taking that on, or strategizing, they're all pioneers. And we probably find there's a dominance of pioneers in this room at the moment. You're self-selecting, you're here listening to me. You know, the other groups aren't so interested in that. Unless, if you're a prospector, you think you might meet a few other people and get on with them and, you know, maybe go on to a party afterwards. You know, it could happen. Whereas the settlers are much less likely to come here, because why would they? You know, this is a problem for other people to solve, so why would I be here in the first place? Prospectors are interesting because they could work against what we're trying to do as well as much as working for. If they think that what they might be engaging in, whether it's getting community together to you know, adopt more renewable energy, or flood prevention, or, you know, improve a grot spot, or whatever it is, if they're jumping up and down and everybody's looking at them and going, what is he on? You know, that's crazy. Nobody cares about this place, and why should the, you know, that is much more likely to result in those prospectors joining with the settlers and not doing anything. And there's not enough pioneers to sort of get a groundswell of opinion. The fact that you almost always get in any initiative 20%, like I did in my fruit and vegetable thing, which we'll talk about in a second, it's always an excitement that you've got anybody to do anything, but then the reality sets in that those are the people who are always going to do it anyway, and you actually haven't got to the 80% that you really need to get to make a difference. So it's a sobering little grid, this. So this is values-based segmentation, and I haven't got the slide, but what I did was I overlaid this with the energy saving trust segmentation, which was more based on the demographic thing, and I went and talked to them a few years ago now in London and showed them that their segmentation was heavily weighted with either pioneers or settlers, and they missed out almost every segmentation. There were 12 of them. Does anybody know what EST does? I think there's 12, isn't there? It was like maybe one out of the 12 vaguely corresponded to the prospectors box. So that's almost 44%, they say, or say for the sake of argument, half the entire population that EST will never motivate to do anything, because they're invisible to them according to their segmentation. So that's why it's so important to understand different ways of understanding how human beings think and react. Okay, good so far? You're all watching me very patiently. All right, this is something that probably most of you do know a bit about. Who has come across this phrase, hands up, framing? Who's never heard of framing, ever? A few people haven't. Okay, so this comes into a whole bunch of different thought. It's not just environmental campaigners who've thought this through, although, again, Chris is very good on this, and he's written a few books about it. Framing effectively is the context, which I alluded to right at the beginning of the talk. It's how we introduce and talk about what we want people to take notice of and act upon, hopefully. And it is in effect the way we understand a message. And so we'll run through it a few times. It sounds a bit vague at the moment. But it is really important to understand that if you don't get it, if the framing is wrong, no matter how much effort you pump into making people aware of the issue that you're trying to disseminate and then trying to get people to act on it, you are never going to succeed. So it's absolutely vital. So a few examples. This is the best. I've tried to explain this vaguely and theoretically, but the best way of doing it is in terms that we can work through as a worked example. So let's do climate change. So I want everybody to use less energy, to travel in the car less, to understand about how global warming is working because of greenhouse gas emissions. And so I'm going to tell everybody that what we're doing is affecting the climate. Okay? Now, some people will get that. Probably the pioneers will get that straight away. Okay? The great majority of people will look at you, look out the window, listen to the weather guys, and say, wait a minute, we're one little species, and the climate's been there forever, and it's just counterintuitive. How can we affect the weather? That's not right. Now, obviously, probably most of us in this room have read all the papers and have gone on the IPCC websites and are pretty well signed up to understanding the way that works. But the great majority of people aren't. It's a terrible way to frame and motivation to get people to use less energy by saying we are affecting the weather and the climate. And even worse in America. Partly because of religious beliefs and partly because of the cultural understanding about how the most powerful country in the world works, that this couldn't possibly be allowed to happen. It's amazing how this works, but it really doesn't play well at all if you use that argument. And so it goes to some way to understand why the environment movement has been so bad at motivating people using the apocalyptic message. People just don't buy it. They just do not think that that is going to happen. Right? There's a massive storm off the eastern seaboard of America as we speak, and there's still people sitting around going, oh, come on, everybody's overreacting. I really hope they get out of their houses because it looks really, really bad. But, you know, in the face of that, the only thing that you can say about this is that when you do have a major storm, like Katrina hitting New Orleans, it did shift American opinion to a certain extent to take climate change more seriously for about 5 years, and then slid back to where it was before. All right, so that's not going to work, so let's go for fossil fuels. Okay, so we have to stop using fossil fuels. Well, again, a lot of people don't actually understand what that means, horrifically. I do this with students all the time. When we have the first week here in the university, it's called induction week, and I get an hour with every incoming student in the School of Built Environment, and I always ask them to put their hands up if they can explain the 3 main fossil fuels. About 20% can do that. It is really worrying. And so for a start, don't get it. I don't understand what that means. And then the next piece is, wait, you know, that's been around for ages and we've always used it, and why is it happening now? And so the time issue doesn't work either. It's not a great way to frame the argument either. So now we come on to pollution. That when we think about what we're doing in the world, and we're putting up all this greenhouse gases, doesn't matter what it is, don't have to understand that. The main thing is we're polluting our environment, and we're making it worse for ourselves and for the people around us. People have reacted to endless environmental crises in the past. They've seen oil spills. They're very worried about drilling in the Arctic. There were famous environmental disasters from the DDT crisis of Raysour Carson in the 60s, contaminated land events in Seveso in Italy, and Love Canal, and you know, the list is endless. If you're a student of environmental catastrophe, you know what it means. Funnily enough, if you couch or frame the argument about climate change in terms of pollution, that works a lot better. People get that a lot more than these other 2 arguments. Because it's much more universal. And you don't have to go through the whole debate about what is climate change, how does the world work, and all the rest of it. So there's much more of this for this guy. The screen's a bit underneath the table there, but this guy called George Lakoff, Lakoff, has done loads of work on this sort of thing, framing. And so a simple talk, and I do this all the time, whether people like it or not, using the natural step as a quick exercise in how the world works, which I'm sure most of you already understand. It's very sobering, you know. We live in a world, it's never in a vacuum, nothing gets in, nothing gets out, everything revolves around the sun, everything we do in the world is what it is, and it doesn't go anywhere, so we're left in our own crap, basically. And people get that. But they've forgotten. They've all learned about it when they were 8 or 9 years old, and, you know, whatever they were doing, talking to the back of the class, or, you know, winds of time have blown away the knowledge. When you remind them about that, all of a sudden, it makes sense again. So pollution. One more. Yeah, we won't go into detail of this, but does everybody know about the natural step? Hands up, who's heard of the natural step? Well, that's all right, that's about half of you. For the other half that haven't, that is a really, really good way of understanding how you can argue how the world works and 4 basic conditions of sustainability, and get that down to audiences, sort it out, 15 minutes, you're working with them in workshops about, you know, that was the point of it. Developed by oncologists in Sweden about 20 years ago. Fed up with talking about sustainability, endlessly trying to define it. What is it? Does it everything? Is it specific? Forget about that. Here's the 4 rules, let's get on with it. Now, what are we going to do about it? Works every time. Because it's mainly science-based. I'll just leave that tantalizingly hanging there for those of you who want to know more. You can look at it yourself. Let's do one more framing thing, and a couple more stories, and then we'll get into our workshop. Flooding. So, let's do flooding as a framing exercise. I don't know if you know this, but 80% of people who live in a flood-threatened area know they live in a flood-threatened area. Nobody believes that their house is going to be flooded. Almost nobody. For a whole bunch of different reasons. Partly we could go back to theories and action and understand why that is. But the fact is that the Environment Agency are pulling their hair out. They don't know what else to do because there is nowhere to go on this. Letters through the bogs, knocking on the door, all the rest of it. It's thank you for coming, that's really nice of you, but we'll be fine, thank you very much. Then they get flooded and, what do you know? At least that's not going to happen again. Believe it or not, you know, people move back into their houses in Tewkesbury and Hull in the firm knowledge that that was a one-off and that's not going to happen again. What on earth can you do about that? The work that I've been doing with the Environment Agency is trying to get people to buy property-level protection. You can get demountable door guards, covers that go over the air bricks, to seal off the space underneath housing, repair cracks, plug up holes, non-return valves so that when you have a surge from the sewers, particularly unpleasant aspect of flooding, that the return valve is one way, so you don't get stuff shooting up through your sink and toilet. That's all good, but nobody's buying that stuff because it ain't going to happen to them. So why would you? That would be a terrible waste of money, and people would laugh at you. Even worse. So how do we do that? We go to them and we say, you're under a massive risk here. You really, really have to act now. So this is similar to the climate apocalypse message. But people don't believe it. They don't think they're under any risk. You cannot convince them. You can't show them statistics. You can't do anything with them. They'll say, oh, but that hasn't happened here for 30 years. Oh, but I'm sure I remember that there was some sort of engineering works a few years ago to stop the river overtopping. Oh, I've got insurance. I've got insurance. I mean, that's just incredible answer for not worrying about it. It's fine. I'll be out of my house for 18 months. All my possessions will be ruined, but at least I'll get my money back. You know, they haven't thought it through. But that's the way people think. So risk is a ridiculously poor framing for getting people to act on flooding. So money is the next one. You will save a lot of money if you spend a little bit now, because all the cleanup later on will not be an issue, because you'll have saved your house. Partly that doesn't work because of the aforementioned insurance thing, but for many people don't have insurance for flooding, by the way. And they feel that that's okay. That's, you know, because I haven't got the money for insurance. I certainly haven't got the money to do flood protection. I haven't got much stuff anyway. I'm not bothered. So that's a really poor frame as well to get people to act. Community, though, is finding much more traction. Why? Because people don't like to think that the vulnerable in their community, whether they're directly related to them or whether it's their neighbours, everybody can always think of at least somebody who lives near enough to them, and they have a mind's eye view, if you paint the picture correctly, of this 80-year-old frail woman floating off into the distance and something awful happening to her. You know, that's not acceptable to human beings. Can't cope with that. Then there's something I can do about that. I can check on them. I can make sure that they're protected. I can at least organise and talk about the issue, which is the first step towards getting people to move. Why? Because the pioneers are almost half of everybody, and they love to get together and do something that's going to work. All right? So, community is a much better way of framing it. Does it make sense? Broadly, yeah. I mean, the reality is that no one's really organising for flood protection anywhere, but no one's listening at all to you if you frame it in the first two. At least they're listening to you if you talk about the vulnerability. All right, a few other things and a few stories, and then we'll do our workshop. I'm sure I have time to tell you all of them. That always annoys people because these bullet points are all tantalising. But in effect, a lot of the work that I've done is about that mysterious fifth box, which is what will people think if I do something. I'm really, really interested in that. Because psychologists say that if you have enough people showing visible signs who people understand, know and trust, family members, neighbours, doctors, whoever you think for yourselves you would listen to and take note of, as opposed to some sort of billboard message that the government puts up, which is risible as a motivational tool. Starts to work, but not in isolation. It's, as you'll see at the end of my presentation, I think all of this works when you put that together with information at the right time and incentivization. That's my thing, that's my little theory, which I've been working on for a while now. So part of what we need to do when we're working with audiences, depending on how much time you have with them, there's a fantastic woman called Rosemary Randall, who's a psychologist, who's done sessions, still doing them, called Carbon Conversations. Some of you might have heard. She works down in Cambridge, another contributor to the Engaging with Climate Change book that I mentioned before. She spends a good amount, many sessions with people talking about their own life experiences and starting to mesh and meld that with what's happening around them. We often don't have enough time, and people have to accept and agree to do that. So if you have a shorter amount of time, one of the best things I've found to do after doing the natural step with them is to get people to close their eyes. Normally I do this with you, but we haven't got much time, so I'll just fast forward and tell you how it's done, and then you can do it yourself. It's really amazing how it works. What I do is I get people to close their eyes and I tell them I'm going to say a word, and then they have to imagine a picture as a result of that word. And the word is sustainability. And why would I pick such a weird word? Nobody gets that. What does it mean? You know, we should get rid of that word. A lot of people say that, don't they? Marketeers and communicators. I think it's the best word because it means the ability to continue into the future. I always challenge people to argue for the counter-argument of that. I haven't had anybody who's come up with a good reason why we shouldn't continue into the future yet. So it's the perfect word. But I use the word to get the picture because purposely because of the uncertainty that people have. Because they are all sitting around a table, no matter where they come from, whether they're in the business, if you like, or completely not. No matter what, we all have an insecurity that we don't completely understand it. We have a different view, and even if we do understand, we know that everybody around the table is going to have a different idea, and therefore I'm not willing to share because my idea might be looked upon as a bit weird and different. And you get into that whole psychological, social psychological problem. So they're all sat there, they've got their eyes closed, say the word, and they imagine a picture. And lo and behold, and I've done this, it must be about 100 times over, probably now, over the last 15 years. 80% of the people, and you get the people to share, first raise of hands and things, and sort of Darren Brown thing. I think that all of you have seen amazing fields of ripe corn in beautiful, pristine environments. Put your hands up if you've seen that. Wow, how did he know that? That's incredible. God, he must be a mind reader. And that is the predominant view. That's the word. That's the way the word conjures. And I also ask people before they start responding to my questions about what the emotion is that they're feeling when they see that picture. And it's always, always totally positive. In fact, it's a feel-good feeling that you can see smiles go on people's faces. It's very strange at times. Looking at a room full of people with their eyes closed, smiling away. But that's it. So you're asking what the other 20% see. They see, and you're wondering whether it was you or not. We haven't done it, so we'll never know. But quite a few people see technological things, windmills, solar panels, depending on what the crowd is. A very few, but always a couple, see the flip side. Total devastation, apocalyptic scenes, charred earth. I used to make fun of them, saying that they need therapy, but I realised that was totally the wrong thing to say, because later on, I stopped doing that many years ago, I learned that some psychological problem solvers always imagine when they're faced with an image that they always see the negative side, and that doesn't mean that they're miserable at all. It just means that that's their starting point, and then that motivates them to do something about it sometimes. Some people, almost always women, but it's a minority obviously, see a supportive scene with friends, family, loving relationships, that sort of thing. But most people see this natural scene. So why are we doing this? Why do I ask it all? It's because, and you do this early on in any session, because if you get the majority of people understanding that they actually all share the same vision, the same idea, the same emotions, it's only that one or two people who've seen the flip side that have a negative idea, and then you can talk them around saying, well, actually, you're working on the other side of the same coin. You get the whole room tied into commonality. And that's really, really important, because once people have that confidence that everybody more or less is on the same page, you can work with them much more easily. There's lots and lots of stories about how social psychologists have been able to do things. Robert Cialdini is a professor of psychology. He's done a lot of experiments with towels in hotel rooms and people counselling at the last minute in restaurants. Anybody familiar with his work? Yeah? No?
Yeah, he wrote that book Influence, didn't he?
Pardon?
He wrote Influence.
He did write a really good book called Influence. Absolutely right. Very good read. Easily readable, actually. He's a bit of a populist, Bob. And so he tells stories about that message that you see in hotel rooms, that we care about the environment. So if you're staying with us for more than a couple of nights, hung up your towel, and you know, you'll help us to save the planet, and nobody ever does, because they say, sod that, I've paid a load of money, I'm going to use a towel every day, I don't care if I've been green or not. None of you would do that, though. But the great majority do. So he put up a different sign. It said that the great majority of people who've stayed in this room reuse their towel if they were staying with it, and the reuse of towel proportion went up right through the roof. Why? Because the very thought, who would know, but the very thought that you were not conforming to the general norm was enough to change people's behaviour. Unbelievable, but there you are. The restaurant one is really good, and this is something you can use yourselves, is that when people voice or affirm in a public place, particularly amongst their peers, an intention to act, they are much more likely to act. So the restaurant was having a lot of no-shows, terrible for business, because those tables just go begging, people don't, you know, it's very hard to fill a table. People don't show up, they weren't ringing to say they weren't, didn't know what to do, so Chialdini went along, what are you saying to them? So, well, when they book, we do tell them that if they can't make it, to ring us, please. He said, right, just change what you say. Instead of saying that, say, if you cannot come, you will tell us, won't you? Requiring an answer. Yes, I will, of course. And the no-shows went from 30% down to 10% in a week. Who would know? Who would know that you told somebody that you've never met in a restaurant you might not have ever been to that you weren't going to show up, but because you told that person you're much more likely. So why is that relevant here? Because if we can get people to stand up and share, you know, Environmentalists Anonymous sort of style, you know, I'm a planet killer, but I've been an environmentalist now for 3 months, and next week I'm going to install a better boiler. And you share, then you're much more likely to actually go through with that, even though nobody would know whether you did or not. It's really, really helpful. The branding thing, some of you might have heard of an initiative, Manchester's My Planet, which I sort of helped to devise. The idea behind it was that you wouldn't have one initiative or 2 initiatives or 5 initiatives, you'd have 50 going on at any one time throughout the city, being sort of championed by a whole variety of different people, the fire councils, community groups, housing associations. Doesn't matter what it is, okay? You might have already been happening, doesn't matter. Pile them all in together and report all the time, so that the law of averages tells you that 5 of them are really flying and doing fantastic things. 15 of them are on their rear doing nothing because nobody could be bothered and the money ran out, and there's a bunch in the middle that are bumbling along. But you've always got 5 to talk about at any one time. Every time the press comes in, every time the website needs updating, any time that anybody asks about it, oh, let me tell you what, you know, those people in Rochdale, amazing, you know, let's go up and see what they're up to, okay? So, you've got that groundswell, you've always got the wave of achievement. Many, many initiatives make the mistake of putting all their eggs in one basket. Because all kinds of stuff happens, and especially nowadays, money runs out, you're in trouble. Don't do that. Do lots and lots of things. And make sure that other people pick up the championing, otherwise you are going to be stuck with a heck of a lot of work to do. And that's not good either. The AMEC story, I haven't really time to go into it, except to tell you that I worked with this construction company a while back, and we used Forum Theatre. Anybody use Forum Theatre? Anybody not know what Forum Theatre is? So Forum Theatre is a way of telling a story, and basically it's a scenario or a future projection, or just telling the way things are and suggesting how they are going to continue to be. It's perfect for sustainability. It actually originated in Brazil and went to China as a way of helping illiterate people to understand government policy, because people couldn't read, they had to act out what they were doing. But in order to make sure that everybody bought into it, you would act out the scenario. The classic is going to a prison and acting out a story where a guy wakes up, he does a few drugs, he puts his knife in his belt, he goes and picks up his dodgy mate, they have 9,000 beers in the pub, but they decide that it'd be a laugh to break in somewhere, they encounter somebody, they're off their heads, the knife comes out, they get stabbed, and they're in life or in prison for life for murder. And it doesn't have to be a true story, but there are stories that you could easily find which follow that pattern. And so you play that out with actors in front of the audience in the prison. And then you go back to the beginning. And you say, right, we're going to do this again. This time, we want interventions. Every time a decision's made or there's a fork in the road, I want somebody to put their hands up and say, what could have happened differently? And that's form theatre. So, obviously, wake up, start going, do some drugs, hands go up. You didn't do the drugs. You shouldn't have done the drugs. Okay, good. Get up, a bit more clear-headed, right? So now he reaches down, we get the knife, and oh no, doesn't go out with the knife. Okay. So, I mean, that's simplistic. There's actually work that does happen in prisons, by the way. But it works beautifully with sustainability. So what we did with AMEC is we played out a storyline where the audience, 130 grumpy people who did not want to be there listening to sustainability, they were the developer, so we put them in the guise of their clients. Always a good idea when you do this, to take people out of their perspective and into somebody else's, particularly the opposition. And then we asked them to choose between two contractors. One was a cartoon version of an environmental contractor, and the other was a cartoon version of a really nasty, low-rent corner cutting outfit. And we then asked them to choose which one they would hire. Outrage, disaffection. First guy stood up, he's purple in the face, just shouted at us, telling us that we'd completely wasted his time. He'd come all the way down from wherever, and he had to listen to this crap. So that was a good start. The next person was equally annoyed, but said, well, I wouldn't have put it the way Bill did, but, really, this is not the way we work. It's all about money. An hour later, a woman stood up and said, I've got a family, I'm devoted to my career, but we can't continue to do what we do. We've got to change. And so, and every intervention between that woman and the first guy continued to move towards the point. Now, we didn't do anything. We didn't indoctrinate them. We didn't lecture them. We didn't talk about sustainability at all. We just presented them with an unsolvable problem and let them get on with it. And that's a version of forum theatre that can work really, really well. But you can do the more literal thing very easily. How do we run our lives? What decisions do we make? How do we hop in the car? Why do we have to see people when we can virtually see them, and all the rest of it? And you can do that. It works very well with kids as well as adults. So that's the paragraph, the idea. There's lots of incentivization things, and you can read many of them for yourself. In Factor 4, in Amy Levin's book, which hopefully you'll know about, but if you don't, you should read it, has lots and lots of stories about how people competed to be the best engineering firm, engineering group in a factory to lower energy levels with no reward whatever except peer recognition. You could have competitions. Competitions are really good. We are in the process of planning a building-by-building competition with rewards. The group that uses the least or saves the most energy in a certain period gets the prize. I am trying to work on that to have a substantial prize, which we'll come on to. It's the level of the prize is very important. I think we should be offering bursaries for PhDs, or a new junior lecturer post for the school or group that does best. Haven't been winning that argument because money's a bit tight in the higher education sector at the moment, but you understand the idea. And then there's reward culture. I sit on the board of FRC Group. Some of you might know, heard of it, Bulky Bob's in Liverpool. It's a social enterprise. And they have got 4 categories: bravery, creativity, passion, and professional abilities. And they reward people monthly, and there's no limit on the awards. So at any one time, there's 80 people in the staff. You might get through a year, you might pick up 2, 3, 4 awards, depending on what you're doing in different areas. And then at the end of the year, they put them all together.
Are these financial, or is it reward?
You do get, I think it's a 10 or something, but it's really not about the money.
Visibility.
Yeah, it's all about recognition, peer recognition. Mostly that's what it's about. Yeah. You can look up all this up on their website, and they also do social accounting and sustainability reporting, which is also on their website. So you can pick up more about that. But that's very effective as well. So there's lots of different ways of doing it. Time. Yeah, it's my last slide for the workshop. This sort of coming together of incentivization, understanding how people work together, how they feed off of each other, and getting information to them at the right time can come together in very effective ways. I love the Beast IV story. Some of you might have heard it, that they wanted to do an eco-reward scheme, and they came up with a conventional way that, well, if you ride your bike to work or whatever, you report it, and then we'll give you a voucher at the end of your time if you rack up enough points. But, that really wasn't as good as the idea that came next, which is that if you do that, you don't get a voucher. Straight away, you get a fish. Anybody heard this one? You get a virtual fish, which goes on your screensaver. Everybody's got the same screensaver, which is a fish tank. And the more sustainability points that you rack up, the more virtual fish you get. Okay. And so you can see what's going on now, right? So everybody's walking through open plan offices, they're all looking at each other's fish tanks. He's got 7 fish. How do you get 7 fish? I've been working on it, so I've got 3 fish. What did you do, Charlie? Oh, well, I decided to change from standard electricity tariff to good energy, and I got 3 fish. But what's that? It's all renewable energy. Is it more expensive? No. Okay, I didn't know. So, the next week, that person's got 3 more fish, etc. So, why is that important? Because it's the information at the point of decision making, which is really, really important. And that's what I learned when I did my work in Timperley. I went around to people's houses and I asked them if they wanted to invest more in energy conservation and flood protection. And most people said no, for a variety of reasons which we've covered. And so I said, okay, here's the deal. You buy a range of stuff after an auditor comes to your house and make sure that you're going to buy the right stuff for the right reasons. And I will give you your money back. But I'm not going to give it to you in cash. I'm going to give it to you, and you choose. You can choose between a combination of free fruit and vegetables, a garden makeover, free access to higher education, free public transport, furniture makeover. And I'll throw in a few beauty sessions and some free restaurant sessions at the local FE as well. And 25 people. We only had, it was proof of concept, so it wasn't a mass survey, a mass experiment. 25 people agreed to have a flood survey as well as energy. That's 25 more than the Environment Agency's ever got people to accept. For reasons which I'd already explained about, the flood protection wasn't taken up, but partly that was because of the high cost. People just didn't have the money. Come back to that if you like. But 5 people went and bought better boilers, had loads of the different kinds of insulation and all the rest of it. So it was a qualified success. But it proved the concept that people would change if you change the context in which they make the decision. And that we used, some of you will know them, Action for Sustainable Living, the group that has been all over really, South Manchester, working with communities. Anybody know them? Yeah, you're from there. No, you know them. Okay. So yeah, they were the interface between us and the residents. And they, when anybody ever had a question or a problem or the report came, people had these people next to them to explain it all. So whenever they made a decision, there was always support there. Now that's very labour intensive. Is that possible? Can you do that nationwide? We'll see. The thing that we proved is that you get more likely decisions when you have these 3 things coming together: incentives, information at the point of decision making, and some kind of norm-based idea which was offered by the community, people like us, working with them. Okay, so that's enough, and I've probably gone on a bit more than I thought, but there you go. So let's get you to, nobody interrupted me, so we're just going to plow on. Does anybody have any reflections, any questions? I mean, there's a bit of a whistle stop, I'm sorry, but I just thought I'd load you up with as much learning as I could from my own experiences.
Yeah, no one wants to dive in first, but
yeah.
So the Rose and Dade
Yeah.
that you referred to, so I'm aware that there's differences of opinion about that. So that, you know, the common cause approach, and based on the work by Schwartz, and then more recently Gruzet and Cass's work on intrinsic and extrinsic goals.
Mm-hmm.
So just wondered what your take was on that, because they quite fundamentally disagree.
They do, yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, what I'm sharing with you is what I've taken out of the literature, what I think will work, and how I've applied that in the field. Okay, and yeah, perhaps I should have been a bit more expansive about the fact that other people think there are other ways of doing it. That's fine. That's fine with me. You know, if you can get in the field with a whole completely different take on how people work and how they make decisions, go out in the field and prove it yourself. That's what I say to them. The combination of things that I've showed to you today works for me, and I would like people to give that a go. But I'm perfectly open to argue with theorists or other people who've experimented in different ways. If you just look at all of the energy, community energy initiatives across the piece, you all see how successful they were up to a point and how that has always tailed off for all the reasons which we've covered, because there isn't a persistence of effect once the money runs out and all the excitement dies down and the cameras go away. I'm also writing a book on green community action called My Neighbourhood, My Planet, borrowed from the Manchester's My Planet idea. And I've been to Ashton Hayes, some of you know, the zero carbon village in Cheshire, and Sustainable Blacon, and even been across to interview the anti-frackers in Pittsburgh, and every time you get the same pattern. You get the same rise of excitement, media comes, it's a new idea, and then the slow tail off. Because there isn't that persistence and reinforcement of these 3 main things, which is continue to incentivize, continue to show examples of how people are adopting, people like us, and this idea that you refresh and renew each initiative with information at the point of decision making. That isn't happening. So I guess I rest my case on where I see things have been happening up until now. But I mean, I wouldn't dispute what other people say. Fair play to them. You know, give it a go. That's what I say. Anybody else got an intervention? Can we do a little bit of work? No? Okay. So this is very easy. You can do this quite quickly. This is your instruction. So we'll probably get together in maybe 3 groups. Just probably take it on the tables, shuffle people around a bit to even it up. So your organisation decided to run a building by building competition to reduce energy consumption. So you need to prepare an influencing strategy that incorporates this values-based approach. I'll put that slide back up in case you've forgotten. And then you have to frame it and incentivize it. So really what you're aiming for here is maximum participation and maximum result. Okay? And it's participation in particular. That's really important, because that is the problem all along a lot of these different ideas. There you go. All right, so there are